I never thought I'd be a believer in ghosts, but then again, I never thought a ghost tour would turn into the most unexpectedly thrilling night of my life. There I was, standing in the middle of this ridiculously old part of town, trying not to look like a total tourist, when he showed up, like something straight out of a movie, but with a ghost hunting vibe. So, quick background. I was visiting Charleston for the weekend, my first solo trip in years, really just to clear my head after a rough breakup. I figured, why not do something different? That's how I ended up signing up for this nighttime ghost tour. It was supposed to be a chill, spooky walk through narrow cobblestone streets and creepy old buildings dripping with history and haunted legends. Perfect for a guy who's into history but also needed a little distraction. The guide, the guy who gave the tours, wasn't at all what I expected. He wasn't some grizzled old storyteller with a booming voice. Instead, he was this lean, late-20s guy with a mop of dark hair that looked deliberately tousled and eyes that were impossibly sharp, like he could see right through you. And honestly, the moment he started talking, I was kinda hooked. Not just on the ghost stories, but on him. His name was Eli. Eli had this easy confidence that didn't try too hard, and his voice was low and smooth, with just the right touch of mystery. But here's the thing. While he was talking about restless spirits and old curses, I noticed his eyes kept flicking over to me. Not in the way a guide scans the crowd for paying customers, but more like I was the only one there he really cared about. It caught me off guard, especially because I'm usually the quiet type, blending into the background. The crowd was a mix of tourists, couples holding hands, and a few history buffs scribbling notes. But between the cracks in the old brick walls and the shadows cast by the flickering lanterns Eli carried, I felt like we were in some private world. And honestly, I couldn't stop watching him. How did someone make a ghost tour feel less like a cheesy tourist trap and more like a scene from a movie where maybe, just maybe, something real was about to happen? As we rounded a corner near this infamous old mansion, rumored to be haunted by a lady in white, Eli paused and turned to the group with that classic storyteller grin. But instead of launching into some creepy tale, his gaze locked on mine for a fraction longer than it should have, and suddenly, the whole night felt different. I'm not kidding when I say I was already hooked. I just didn't know it was gonna be about him, and that's when I realized maybe ghosts weren't the only things lingering in the shadows tonight. His eyes held mine just a second longer than polite, and I swear I felt my own pulse speed up, even though I was standing perfectly still in the chilly night air. The rest of the group was shifting uncomfortably, expectant, ready for the usual ghost story, but Eli just stayed quiet for a beat, then his lips curved into a sly smile. "All right, everyone," he finally said, voice low and magnetic. "This next one's a bit different. It's not really about the ghosts you can see, but the ones you feel. The ones that linger in heartbreak and hope." I laughed quietly to myself, thinking, ghosts of broken hearts? That's definitely more my speed tonight. He started walking again, lantern casting long shadows on the weathered bricks, and I followed along, trying to keep my cool but totally aware that I was paying way more attention to him than the creepy stories. Eli had this way of talking, like he was telling secrets meant for your ears only, even when he was addressing the whole group. His voice softened when he said things like, "They say the walls remember," and "some spirits don't want to rest." At one point, when the group stopped near a wrought iron gate twisted with rust, Eli glanced back at me and said, "Ever feel like you're haunted by something you can't even explain? Like a ghost you can't escape?" His voice was just above a whisper, but somehow I caught it crystal clear. I didn't answer, mostly because I was trying not to sound like a total idiot. But yeah, I knew exactly what he meant. Breakups stick with you like shadows, even when you're sure you've left them behind. The group moved on, but Eli lingered beside me a little longer than he did with the others. "You seem like you've been carrying a few ghosts yourself," he said, not as part of the spiel, but like it was genuine concern. I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Yeah, well, who hasn't?" He chuckled, this warm, easy sound that made the cold air feel less biting. "Fair enough, but sometimes facing your ghosts is the only way to move on." I wanted to say something clever, maybe flirt back a little, but I just nodded. Instead I asked, "So do you believe in all this?" The ghosts? The hauntings? Eli's eyes lit up. I think there's more to the world than what we see, but sometimes the real hauntings aren't about spirits. They're about feelings, regrets, loss, love left unsaid. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel less alone. Like he got it, without me needing to explain. The tour wrapped up near an old cemetery, where the moonlight hit the moss-covered stones just right. The group started to disperse, chatting nervously or pulling their jackets tighter. But I found myself standing next to Eli, not ready for the night to end. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for the tour. You're a hell of a storyteller." He grinned. "Glad you enjoyed it. Most people just want the cheap scares, but you seemed interested in something a bit deeper. Maybe I'm a please mirror for heartbroken ghost stories." I admitted, and for the first time that night, he didn't look away. "Maybe," he said, then paused like he was about to say something else, then changed his mind. "Listen, I'm usually not great at this," he started, scratching the back of his neck. "But if you want, there's a little cafe down the street that stays open late. I'd love to keep talking. About ghosts, heartbreak, or whatever." I hesitated for less than a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." We walked there together, the glow of street lamps and neon signs painting the sidewalks with soft colors. The cafe was cozy, small, with mismatched chairs and an old jukebox in the corner. We found a booth in the back, away from the few other late-night patrons. For the next couple of hours, we talked about everything and nothing. His job giving ghost tours, why he loved Charleston, the strangest things he'd seen on his routes. He told me about his own ghosts, the mistakes and losses that still lingered, and I shared a little too, more than I expected to. There was this honesty between us that felt raw and refreshing. No awkward small talk, no forced flirtation, just real connection. At one point, Eli reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a haunted house. It's letting someone see the parts of you you're trying to hide." I looked at him, heart pounding. And maybe for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to run from that fear. Neither of us said it out loud, but the air between us shifted, charged with something new, something promising. When we finally stepped back outside, the streets were quieter, and the night felt less lonely. Eli's hand found mine, fingers lacing together without hesitation. "Want to see if this ghost story can have a happy ending?" he asked with a grin. I laughed, squeezing his hand. "Yeah, let's find out." We ended up wandering the quiet streets, hand in hand, like a couple that had known each other for years instead of a couple of strangers who'd just met on a ghost tour. The city was different at night, softer somehow. The usual buzz was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of distant conversations and the occasional clink of glasses from nearby bars. Eli led me down a narrow alley that opened into a small square I'd never seen before. Fairy lights twined through the trees, and a few couples sat on benches, wrapped in whispered conversations. It felt private, like our own little bubble away from the rest of the world. So I said, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice, "You give these tours all the time? Is it usually this intense?" He laughed, the sound low and warm. "Depends on the crowd. Most people just want the spooky stuff and the corny jokes. But tonight, you seemed different. Like you were here for more than just the scares." I shrugged, smiling. "I guess I was. I was hoping to distract myself, but honestly, you kind of distracted me instead." Eli's eyes flicked to mine, and there it was again. That look, like he was trying to figure me out but also not wanting to rush it. "Maybe that's a good thing," he said softly. We sat on the bench beneath the fairy lights, and for a while, neither of us said much. I just watched him. How the light caught the planes of his face, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. It was more intimate than any ghost story, more real than any legend I'd heard that night. "I don't get out much," Eli admitted after a bit, sounding a little vulnerable. "Most nights I'm just here doing tours or reading. It's easier to live in the past sometimes." I nodded. "I get that. I've been running from my own past for a while now." He looked at me, honestly curious, and I felt a sudden urge to tell him everything. The breakup, the heartbreak, the nights I stayed up replaying every stupid mistake. But I held back, not ready to unload all that on someone I'd just met. Instead, I said, maybe we both have ghosts we're trying to shake off. He smiled, a little sad but hopeful. Yeah, maybe. There was a quiet moment. Then Eli reached out and took my hand again, fingers weaving through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do you want to come back to my place? He asked. I promise, no ghost stories, just coffee and maybe some bad TV. I hesitated for a split second. It was late, and I didn't know him that well, but something about the way he said it, so genuine and low-key, made me say yes. We walked back through the empty streets, the air cooler now but not cold. It felt like the night was holding its breath, waiting. His apartment was just a few blocks away, an old brick building with creaky stairs and a door that opened onto a small, cluttered living room. Books were everywhere, stacked on shelves, tables, even on the floor in uneven piles. It smelled like coffee and old paper dot. Eli made a pot while I settled onto the couch, the soft hum of the city outside the only other sound. We talked more about favorite movies, bad dating stories, hopes for the future. The conversation was easy, like we'd known each other much longer than a few hours. At one point, I caught him watching me, his eyes soft and something like wonder in them. You're different, he said quietly. I don't know why, but you are. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Maybe because I'm not pretending. He nodded, moved a little closer, and suddenly I was aware of every small detail. The curve of his jaw, the way his breath hitched just a little as he looked at me. Then his hand was on my cheek, gentle but sure, and I leaned into it, heart racing. We kissed, slow, a little hesitant at first, but then with a kind of urgency that surprised me. It was real and messy and perfect all at once. When we pulled apart, Eli rested his forehead against mine, breath mingling. Why does this feel like the start of something really good? He whispered. I didn't have a neat answer, but I knew one thing. After all the ghosts I'd been running from, maybe it was time to stop hiding. Because it is, I said, and meant it. The night stretched ahead, full of possibilities, and for once I wasn't afraid of what came next. We ended up sitting there on his couch for hours, well past the time when There's something about the quiet moments after our first kiss that's both thrilling and terrifying. Like you're teetering on the edge of something new, but not quite sure if you want to jump or hold back. Eli had this old beat-up guitar propped up in the corner, and, after a while, he picked it up and started strumming softly. I wasn't expecting it. I honestly didn't think he played, but the music was gentle and kind of melancholy, fitting the mood perfectly. He sang too, just a little, the words low and sincere. It wasn't some polished performance. It was just him, sharing a piece of himself with me in a way that felt way more intimate than any ghost story he'd told earlier. I told him about my own musical disasters back in high school, and he laughed, this full laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. It was the kind of laugh I wanted to hear again and again. Somewhere between the music and the stories, the conversation drifted to lighter stuff. Favorite foods, guilty pleasure TV shows, the weird little things about ourselves we never usually admit. I learned that Eli was obsessed with old horror movies, but had a soft spot for romantic comedies, which honestly made me like him even more. At one point, he reached over and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. You're really something, he said quietly, voice almost hoarse from singing. I felt my cheeks heat up but smiled anyway. You're not so bad yourself. As the night wore on, the easy space between us felt less like two people getting to know each other and more like two people quietly agreeing that maybe this was where they were meant to be, at least for now. Eventually, the clock on the wall reminded me that the sun would be up before I knew it. I groaned, realizing I'd lost track of time completely. I should probably head back, I said reluctantly, standing up and stretching. Eli nodded but didn't move. Yeah, I get it. Early mornings and all that. Before I could say anything else, he stepped closer, this time with a little more confidence. But maybe tomorrow night you'll want to do this again? No ghosts, no tours, just us. I looked at him, heart still pounding, and realized I was already hoping for that. Yeah, I said, I'd like that. We exchanged numbers. He typed his into my phone, and I did the same, and then there was that awkward, hopeful moment before I left. When our hands brushed, neither of us pulled away quickly. I thought about staying, about what it'd be like to just keep going with him, but I knew I needed to keep my own balance. On the walk back to my hotel, the city felt different. Not haunted or spooky anymore, but alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. Like maybe the ghosts I'd been running from weren't the only things lurking in the shadows. The next day, I found myself texting Eli more than I probably should have. We joked about ghost stories and swapped music recommendations, and before I knew it, I was counting down the hours until we could meet again. When night came, I was back in the same part of town, heart thudding in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Eli was waiting outside a tiny coffee shop, grinning like he'd been waiting for me all day, which, honestly, was kind of adorable. "You made it," he said, slipping his arm around my waist. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, feeling more alive than I had in months. We spent the evening wandering through the city again, this time without the ghost tour, just two guys talking about everything and nothing. We stopped at a little bookstore tucked into a side street, and Eli showed me his favorite old editions of classic novels. I teased him about being a hopeless romantic, and he just laughed, that same warm laugh I couldn't get enough of. Later, we ended up on a bench watching the river, the water shimmering under the streetlights. We talked about our dreams, our fears, the kind of people we wanted to be. I told him about my breakup, the way it had left me feeling like I was stuck in a loop of regret and loneliness. And he listened, not just politely, but like he cared. He said after a long silence, "Sometimes you have to face your ghosts head on, or they'll just keep pulling you back." "I'm trying," I admitted. "It's hard." He reached for my hand again. "You don't have to do it alone." I looked at him, really looked at him. The way the lamplight danced in his eyes, the gentle curve of his smile. And I realized maybe I hadn't had to be alone the whole time. As the night deepened, that connection between us only grew stronger. There was an unspoken promise hanging in the air, something hopeful and fragile. I wasn't sure where this was headed, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to find out. We stayed on that bench for a while, the river's gentle rush blending with the distant hum of late-night traffic. Eli's fingers were warm wrapped around mine, and I thought about how different this felt from the nights I'd spent scrolling through my phone, staring at pictures of a past I was trying so hard to forget. It was wild how fast things could change when you let yourself be present. Eventually, Eli leaned back, staring up at the stars like he was trying to read their secrets. "You ever wonder if people are like ghosts in some ways?" he asked quietly. "Drifting through life, leaving little marks on the people they touch, even if they're gone now?" I smiled at the thought, the way he framed it. "Yeah, I think everyone's got a few ghosts. Memories, regrets, people who left a mark without even knowing it." He glanced over at me, eyes shining in the low light. "And sometimes you meet someone who helps you stop haunting yourself." I wanted to say something clever, something that made it clear I felt the same. But all I managed was a soft, "Yeah." We sat there, fingers still intertwined, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. It wasn't awkward. It was like breathing, natural and necessary. After a while, Eli finally broke the quiet. "You should come see a tour sometime. Not just as a tourist, maybe as a guest star." I laughed. "What, like the guy who distracted the ghost guide?" "Exactly. You could be my co-guide." "I could use someone who's good at keeping an eye on the audience," I smirked. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." "Fair," he said, grinning. "But you'd be great." That little exchange felt like the start of something bigger than just jokes and flirtations. Like we were building our own story, piece by piece. The next few days were a blur of easy texts, stolen moments, and long conversations that stretched into early mornings. We explored Charleston together. Hidden coffee shops, quiet parks, and a few more ghostly spots Eli loved to show off. But the ghosts weren't the point anymore. It was him. The way he laughed when I told terrible jokes. The way he listened when I talked about things I usually kept locked away. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting on the steps of an old library, the sun warm on our faces. Eli was fiddling with his camera, trying to capture the way the light hit the ivy crawling up the stone walls. "You really see the world differently," I said, watching him. He shrugged, cheeks coloring a bit. Maybe because I've had to look a little closer. You don't notice the small stuff when you're rushing through life. I nodded, feeling that in my bones. I'm trying to slow down. He looked up at me, eyes hopeful and steady. Maybe slowing down is exactly what you needed. That day, something shifted. We weren't just two guys who'd met on a ghost tour anymore. We were something more tentative, fragile, but real. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people learning to trust each other, one moment at a time. Of course it wasn't perfect. We had our awkward moments, like when I accidentally knocked over his favorite stack of books, and he pretended to be mad but couldn't keep the smile off his face. Or when he teased me relentlessly about my terrible taste in music. But those little imperfections only made things feel more genuine. One evening, after a quiet dinner at a tiny seafood spot, Eli swore had the best hush puppies in town. We walked back to his apartment under a sky painted with stars. You know, Eli said as we reached his door, there's this old lighthouse nearby. It's supposed to be haunted, but I think it's just beautiful. I looked at him, feeling a rush of affection I hadn't expected. Want to check it out with me tomorrow? His grin was slow and sweet, like he was holding a secret. I'd like that. As I stood there, watching him disappear inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't the kind of naive hope that says everything will be perfect, but the kind that says maybe, just maybe, you can find light even in the darkest places. And maybe the ghosts I'd been worried about all along were just shadows waiting to be outshone. I wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like an invitation, a chance to write a new story together. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of nervous excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. I kept replaying the night before. Eli's touch, his smile, the way he looked at me like I was something rare and worth holding on to. It's funny how quickly loneliness can shift into something hopeful when you least expect it. I met him outside his building around mid-morning, the sun already warm but not unbearable. He was waiting with his camera slung over his shoulder, the same mischievous grin I was starting to know so well lighting up his face. "You ready to see if this lighthouse is haunted?" he teased. "Only if you promise not to scare me too much." I shot back, and he laughed. We walked through the city, the streets humming with midday life, but I felt like we were in our own little bubble again. I kept stealing glances at him, the way his hair caught the light, the subtle crease on his brow when he was concentrating on framing a shot, and I caught myself smiling without even realizing it. When we reached the lighthouse, it was even more breathtaking than Eli had described. Standing tall against the sky, weathered stone walls wrapped in vines, windows like watchful eyes. It wasn't scary at all, just quiet and dignified, like it had survived 1,000 stories. We climbed the spiral staircase inside, narrow and creaky, each step echoing softly. Near the top, Eli paused, resting his hand on the railing, eyes distant. This place has seen a lot of history: war, storms, lost sailors. People say the lighthouse keeps their stories alive. I leaned against the wall, watching him. "Do you believe that? That places can hold memories?" He looked at me, that familiar softness in his gaze. "I want to. There's something comforting about it, you know? Like even when people are gone, part of them stays behind." I nodded, feeling the weight of what he said. For so long, I'd been trying to outrun my own past, but Eli's words made me think maybe it wasn't about running. It was about carrying those pieces with you, letting them shape you without defining you. At the top of the lighthouse, the view stretched out endlessly, the river winding like a silver ribbon, the city's rooftops glowing in the morning sun. Eli snapped a few photos, then turned to me with that shy smile. "Want to take one together?" I hesitated for a second, then nodded. We squeezed close, his arm around my waist as the camera timer clicked. When the picture popped up on the screen, we both burst out laughing at how goofy we looked, but honestly, it was perfect. The rest of the day slipped by in a blur of small adventures, finding a hidden bakery with the best cinnamon rolls I've ever tasted, wandering through an art gallery where Eli got excited explaining his favorite pieces, and ending up on a park bench watching people go by, just talking about everything and nothing. By the time we walked back to his place that evening, the air held a golden glow, the kind that makes everything feel a little softer. Inside, Eli pulled me close. "I'm really glad you're here," he murmured, fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "Me too," I said honestly. "I didn't think a ghost tour would lead to this." He smiled, that slow, warm smile that always made my heart feel like it was both breaking and mending at the same time. We spent that night wrapped up in each other, the world outside fading until there was only us. It wasn't just about the physical closeness. It was the way he made me feel seen, understood. Like I wasn't just another guy passing through his life, but someone he wanted to hold on to. As days turned into nights and nights into mornings, our connection deepened. We started stealing moments between Eli's tours and my wandering explorations. Late night talks over coffee, quiet mornings with shared playlists, and walks through the city that made it feel like home. But with all the warmth came the inevitable cracks. Moments where my old fears and insecurities bubbled up. Sometimes I'd catch myself pulling away, worried I wasn't ready, or that the ghosts I'd been running from would catch up and ruin everything. Eli noticed, of course. One evening, as we sat in his kitchen, he reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Hey," he said softly, "whatever's bothering you, you don't have to carry it alone." I looked down at his hand, feeling the steady strength there. "It's just hard to believe this is real, that someone actually wants me." He squeezed my fingers. "You're worth it, more than you know." That moment, simple, honest, was a turning point. I realized I didn't have to be perfect or unbreakable. I just had to be willing to try, to open up, to let Eli in. And maybe, just maybe, the ghosts of my past could finally rest. One night, as we watched the city lights twinkle below from Eli's apartment window, he leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "You've changed everything for me." I smiled, heart full. "And you for me." In a world that sometimes feels haunted by what's been lost, finding someone who's willing to stand with you in the dark, that's the kind of magic no ghost story can ever touch. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living, and I was doing it with him. Months passed, and with each day, the edges of my old loneliness softened. Eli and I settled into a rhythm that felt natural. No grand declarations or rushed promises, just steady moments of togetherness. There were still days when the ghosts of my past whispered doubts, but they didn't feel like chains anymore. Instead, they were reminders of how far I'd come. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves back near the river, the same spot where we'd shared so many quiet conversations. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm glow over everything. We sat side by side on a bench, his hand casually brushing mine, fingers intertwined without any need for words. "I used to think love was this big dramatic thing," I said, eyes fixed on the water. "Something that either burns bright and fast or ends in heartbreak. But with you, it's different. It's quiet, it's steady. And somehow, that feels a lot more real." Eli smiled, leaning his shoulder against mine. I felt the same way. It's not about perfect moments or grand gestures. It's about showing up, day after day, even when it's messy or scary. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with trust. I realized that this slow building of something genuine was what I'd been searching for all along. Later that evening, as we wandered back through the city's winding streets, Eli stopped outside one of the old buildings he used to include in his tours. He turned toward me, eyes bright. "Remember when I said I'd show you the ghosts that linger in heartbreak and hope?" I nodded, heart skipping. "Well, maybe the only ghosts worth chasing are the ones that lead us to someone who makes us want to be better. Someone who helps us finally let go." I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad I followed your tour that night." He grinned, that same mischievous sparkle in his eyes. "Me too." Walking side by side, no longer haunted by the past, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Home. Not a place, but a person. And that was enough. In a city filled with stories of ghosts and mysteries, the best story I'll ever know is the one we're writing together. Imperfect, unexpected, and entirely ours.